So this afternoon, we give focus to an important chapter because it is a chapter that deals with issues of skills. It is a chapter that gives attention to the issue of the challenges that are within our country, particularly in our effort to upskill and make sure that we've got all the necessities that we need to be active participants to this idea of the knowledge economy. You will remember in chapter one, we were talking about terms like the knowledge economy. We were talking about terms like digitization. We were talking about the importance of increasing competitiveness through human capital management or human resources management. So, the focus of this chapter is on three aspects which are distinct, which are training, development, and learning. At the core of it all, these three aspects form very key aspects related to the constituents of making sure that South Africa's competitiveness is not only taken seriously, but South Africa's competitiveness is also seen to be proactive in addressing historical challenges, but also new challenges. So nowadays, you'll hear a lot of people talk about the fourth industrial revolution. So we must be at the leading front of making sure that the technologies that we use and the skills that we're working at driving towards are skills that are related to what our market needs. There is no point in having skills that have got no relevance to what the market needs because it ultimately influences our quest for productivity and our quest to be better at what we do. So that's just a broad introduction, if you like. But when we zero in, we also must provide some form of distinction to some of these terms that we may use rather interchangeably because they mean different things and in different contexts they impose different meanings. So let's start by just clarifying the differences that exist between these terms that we are talking about. Training is more specially found within organizational contexts. You'll even have a function which is dedicated to making sure that training is happening, which is known as the training function or training activity. Really, at best, this is our attempt to try and change the knowledge, skills, and behaviors of employees through the impartation of some form of corrective measures that then help these behaviors to change. Ultimately, by changing the knowledge, skills, and behaviors, we are then arguing for the importance of knowing that no matter what difficulty exists in terms of a training need in the organization, the onus and responsibility by the HR function is still there to seek to say we must try and address the said challenges. So this is where training comes in to change behavior, to change knowledge, to change skills, to be able to move from a position where these things were not happening at the level at which they were happening, but to try and make sure that we also capture for a room for improvement. You'll hear people say that the biggest room in the house is the room for improvement. Um, the other issue or the other commonly used term is education, which again would fit in with what we are currently doing as an institution of higher learning, which is a process where we try to give you some form of knowledge, skill, or moral values and understanding as part of a developmental course of life, and the focus being on setting you up nicely for the future. Please note, with regard to the definition of education, which you see here, we are not saying that we are going to be able to change everything. For instance, a university can teach you a class in ethics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be an ethical person after taking the class. I can teach you a class in ethics, and after teaching that class in ethics, give you a test, and you score 100% in the test. It doesn't in any way mean that you will be an ethical person. What it simply means is that you have been provided a means through which you can be aware of the concept of ethics and how the concept of ethics not only features as part of your lived experience, but also the experience that you have in preparation for whatever future state that we want you to occupy. And then finally, development, which is more long term than the two concepts that we've introduced. Development really is about making sure we've got a focus towards creating opportunities, creating some form of an awareness, creating some form of a prioritization of learning opportunities, and making these the mainstay, the lifeblood of the organization through incorporating the first two processes, training and education. But however, the focus being really to, number one, develop the individual, and number two, to also develop the organization in totality. So development really would incorporate the usage of the two issues here, which is training and education. But really, the focus is more long term. The focus is more on making sure that we are speaking to the overall benefit, really, on a long term trajectory of assisting not only organizations but people to be better. So, the most important thing that we have in this chapter, which is critical and which you need to know, is the training development process. Now, if you're a diligent student, you will pick up that this issue of processes features very well and very much in the different chapters that we've covered so far. In the chapter on performance, we had the performance management process. In the chapter on what's the other one? In the chapter on um, recruitment and selection and onboarding, we had processes that we were talking about. In the chapter on compensation, and in the chapter on training and development, we come across very fervently aspects related to training and development. And what we are merely saying here is that for an organization to be effective, it must pay attention to this process, which is known as the training and development process. Often, these processes are criticized in the way they are positioned to be linear, fixed, stable, systematic, process based, one step after the other. Yet the reality could somewhat be a little bit complicated. So what we try to encourage students is yes, to acknowledge the existence of these models, but to also realize that reality as we know it can be somewhat a bit more messy and complicated. But the processes and the models that we work with help us to achieve a very important part of the activities that we want to do, which is to understand better the issues that are at stake and the issues that are affecting us in terms of the activities that we are concerned with. And in this case, we are concerned with the activities of training, development. We are concerned with the activities that concern the uptake of skills, and we are concerned with the activities of the change of behavior. So let's look at these processes, and which are four steps. The first of these is to first identify the needs that training and development seeks to occupy and to fill out. And these needs are grouped into two types of needs. There are needs that are individual needs, and there are needs that are organizational needs. Some other books would call this a TNA, a training needs analysis. A training needs analysis is basically looking at the individuals in the organization and also looking at the organization itself at a wider trajectory and wider scale, and seeking to ask some very difficult question, which is, what is causing us not to perform at our optimum best? What are the challenges that are happening that are causing us not to perform at this best? And ultimately, the thinking is that by setting these questions about the challenges that are affecting the reality on the ground, we are then in a better position to be able to propose, as we go to stage two, development objectives which speak specifically to these needs at an individual and organizational level. So we must make it clear that the focus here is on making sure that we are not only in a good position in diagnosing the problem that we are suffering from, but we are also in a good position to formulate a set of objectives that are able to make sure that we then develop and design interventions that speak to the challenges or the needs that we have on the ground. And once we have identified these objectives that speaks to the challenges of the needs and issues that we have on the ground, we are then able to be in a position where we then choose appropriate training and development methods to be able to introduce whatever intervention that is to assist employees. And I'm going to give an example after we cover the last one. And then once we've chosen the most appropriate intervention, we then work to making sure that this intervention is not only implemented, but this intervention is also evaluated. The process of evaluation is really trying to take into account the return on investment that happens when we put in a lot in terms of investment to challenges that we have. So the evaluation of these interventions, you could borrow from the work of scholars such as, and practitioners really, such as David Kirkpatrick, Donald Kirkpatrick, who argues that for training to be effective as you evaluate training, please pay attention to four particular things. The first one is evaluating the training and reactions that people may have as part of the intervention. So people sit down and evaluate to say, okay, the intervention given to us is that we are going to be assisted in this way. And then we then measure the reactions of people to those interventions. And this is often known as a reactionnaire because it's measuring what people felt about the intervention. The second way of looking at it is looking at it through the lens of the actual learning that has happened, and we do it in the higher education context as part of a measure of understanding whether you know what you have been taught. We give you tests, and in these tests, we question the things that we have taught you as a way of trying to see that you are understanding what has been taught to you. Kirkpatrick also spoke about measuring change in behavior as a third stage of evaluating the training intervention. Basically, what he referred to here was just to say, for us to understand the role and impact of training, we must also be able to notice salient changes in behavior. So if in an organizational context, we had a lot of breakages and then people were trained and then we notice that the breakages have become minimal, we can possibly try and attribute the training intervention to be responsible for the minimal or the reduction in the number of breakages. And that change in behavior can then be attributed to the training function. We can go further, finally, by looking at organizational results as framed by Donald Kirkpatrick. Organizational results are also a measure of looking at the impact of training within organization. We then pay attention to the results, the return on investment, how well are we performing at the end of each quarter, maybe, and then we attribute any form of intervention to improve performance to be attributed to the change in the organizational behavior in terms of the results, and therefore the conclusion could be this change is responsible for the successes that we are witnessing and seeing. We can take this further by paying attention also to distinctions that exist within organizations between managers and supervisors. The expectation is that supervisors are slightly lower at a lower level than managers. But what we're saying here is both managers and supervisors would need to have a process that takes care of their own development as important actors or stakeholders within the organization. This type of intervention is known as the management and supervisory development, and is basically a process of making sure that we are not only educating but developing employees into becoming possible future leaders of this organization, training them to be better managers and leaders. And in so essence, we are trying to say we are trying to impact the knowledge, the skills, and attitudes, and understand, if any, the barriers that exist to be able to manage and to be able to supervise with clarity. So the purpose then for such interventions, these are targeted towards a tier such as management and supervision. They ensure the long-term success of the organization. Why? Because we've got continuity and a possible pipeline of people who we can work with in terms of assisting us to be better. We then challenge directly this challenge of managerial obsolescence, where we hope one day we don't wake up and we realize there are no leaders to step up and lead the organization. So through an effective managerial and supervisory development intervention, we are able to prepare the next generation of leaders and managers for the organization. Each individual manager in such a program is able then to be used to utilize or to be at the fullest potential, allowing them, therefore, to find ways and strengths that can be developed and address weaknesses that need attention. We therefore then can ensure that there are competent replacements for future vacancies. I think this links to the idea of human resources planning that we have been talking about. We therefore can create an efficient team. Remember, supervisors and managers sometimes are called to be important team-based agents to assist in the development of individuals. We therefore then enable managers and supervisors to be able to create the necessary context through which their employees can strive, through which they can fulfill their, not just their own full potential, but the potential of their organization. We then must address some key issues. And one of the key issues concerns in us questioning why training and development is important and how we can be better through efforts related to training and development. So here we now take a jump and we're looking basically at advantages of training and development. Basically, that's what we are looking at. Advantages of training and development. So what are some of the advantages of training and development? The first one, we've got an increased ability of an employee to be able to do their job at the required threshold or at the required level. And that's a given, because we are now speaking to the needs that they have to become better. And because we're speaking to the needs that they have to become better, it's somewhat a lot easier for us to then find a way of improving the experience of work. It assists us, training and development assists us to improve aspects related to not only productivity, but employee performance. And that's a given, because the ultimate aim is to say, we want to find ways of making you work better. It reduces turnover and increases motivation. Remember, turnover is bad, because turnover is the rate at which people are leaving the organization. So we need to lower down the turnover. In other words, the rate at which people are leaving. And we need to increase aspects related to motivation itself. In essence, we then reduce costs attributed to incapacity, and not only costs, but the complexity and headaches of lawsuits that may come out of incapacity. You can have a case, I think the recent one I read was of a person who bought a meal in one of these fast food outlets. And as they bought their meal to enjoy their meal in the fast food outlet, they then found the chicken that they bought had mold and all of these things. So by training people properly and looking out for them and creating opportunities for development, we are then able to also allow for the room and experience of making sure that we find channels through which we can be corrected, learn skills that we need, and also speak to the challenges and uniqueness of the situation on the ground and in our communities. Training and development also reduces the need to dismiss workers because of incapacity, legal issues. It reduces costs and lowers down aspects related to wastage. So we are not able to waste because there is an intervention that allows us to be able to put all of this into effect. There's less supervision, there's more autonomy, more self-directed working and self-directed learning. There is reduced breakage of equipment, because people now know how to handle the equipment and not just damage things. The right attitude is fostered amongst employees, and with the right attitude, the argument is that we can become better and go far. There's a possibility for employees to exceed expectations of their role through having their needs being met. It may benefit also employees themselves, because morale can be lifted. And for the end user or the customer in place, the idea suits very well conformity towards making sure that the customer is satisfied. And you will remember the saying that goes, the customer is king. It allows us to give focus to the customer. So importantly, we then must ask questions around, how does the law link with the function of training and development? How does the law link with the function of training and development? We've got a range of instruments and provisions of law that are seen to be critical in promoting training and development issues. The NQF system, which is this National Qualifications Framework, which allows us to create an integrated framework in which we recognize and appraise a range of learning achievements uniformly and also to assist the standardization of maybe those qualifications which may be acquired from outside the country. So we are then able to facilitate access to and the mobility and progression within education, training, and career paths. It also enhances the quality of education because the NQF system calls for a constant re-examination of what we are training and teaching students. And that's not always easy, but I think the existence of standards like that allows us to be able to work with that. We therefore can also accelerate the reparation of the past through any form of unfair discrimination in education, training, and employment opportunities. And so what we end up doing here, we end up giving attention and focus to acknowledging whatever discrepancies that may have happened in the past, but also trying to position some form of future advantage for the sake of the future. We try to also then contribute to the full personal development of each learner who is registered for whatever um, training or education or learning intervention. We then seek ways in making sure that they are integrated into the society as an important social development angle that allows us to work better at what we do. So this new NQF system has introduced another important facet, which is called the NQF, which is called the quality councils. A number of these quality councils exist in different trades and professions as units that are set up to be able to make sure there's some form of adherence to the issues on the ground through which skills are concerned. This includes higher education, the general and further training, which comprises of the TVET system. Interestingly, last week at the University of Fort Hare, Minister Blades Zimande was here opening a new residence, and the minister was encouraging us to say, listen, if you go to countries like Germany, Germany is able to absorb a number of youths into what you would call TVETs here in achieving the challenges of the system that they operate in. And what we need also in South Africa is this radical think around the challenges that we're operating within. We also have then a focus into trades and occupations. I remember having stayed in the UK and Ireland a couple of years ago, that the guys who were making money were in the professions that in this part of the world would not necessarily be received very well. These were people who were craftsmen, boiler makers, plumbers, mechanics. And the thinking here is that, colleagues, we may need to rethink the obsession that we have with a degree and the obsession that we have with these qualifications, because in most cases, they ultimately just make us theoreticians to just understanding problems without them making us practical people, pragmatic people who are seeking to solve challenges that are around us. So the issue, therefore, is uh, as we strive to find ways and solutions of becoming better, one of the things we should be working towards is making sure that we are able to challenge ourselves in terms of what is working and what is not working within the context of the environment that we are focused on. So a third instrument, remember we've got NQF, we've got then these quality councils. We also can have um, other things such as the Skills Development Act, which is important because the Skills Development Act allows us to be able to focus on the importance of skills. And we know this very well because we get a deduction that focuses on the development of skills. We also have what's called the SDL, or Skills Development Levy. So we need to develop the skills of the South African workforce. And how do we do that? Well, we need to increase investment in education and training. It sounds like I'm contradicting myself, because earlier on I was calling for a major rethink into and stop the obsession with the degree. But what we also need to think about is, how do we increase investment in education and training? We need to encourage employees and employers to work together, particularly employers, the private sector, to create workplaces that are conducive for learning, where people develop their skills, to provide employees within the opportunity to develop themselves, to be able also to provide opportunities for new entrants to the labor market so that they gain much needed experience. And this is a difficult one, because the labor market it still has very high entry barriers, particularly for your marginalized groups, blacks, women, and the focus therefore is to make sure that whatever it is that we are encouraging, it links to making sure that we encourage new entries into the market. And perhaps maybe the university system needs to also change its approach to be able to provide for a way and a system of making sure we in a place where we allow ourselves to become better. We also need to assist work seekers to find work, those that may be retrenched to enter the market, re-enter the market, not always easy. We also need to provide and regulate employment services through the provision of support mechanisms that assist those that are in the labor market. An issue which is always interesting to research on, which is the issue of organizational learning. It's really a more modernized approach for the organization to make sure that our organizations are conducively covering issues related to learning and development of employees. And this becomes a global economy imperative that we should find in each and every organization. So in such an organization, we try to account for the creation, use, and management of knowledge so that it becomes central to the development of employees. In so doing, knowledge economies are becoming widely spoken of, and popular terms of reference. Knowledge in this case is really fluid. Knowledge could also mean book knowledge. It could also mean knowledge that is passed around experientially. It could also mean knowledge that is found in the experience that a person goes through. So, what we are encouraging here is to the promotion of knowledge within the confines of the workplace, so that not only is the workplace better, but the people who are working in the workplace become better. And this knowledge creation is really actuated by four important issues. The first one is socialization, which simply argues that through the interaction of people in society or in situ, they are able to create meaning and subsequently create some form of knowledge in the process of doing so. The second one is articulation, which is really the expressing of whatever innate opinions and values that a person may have, as a way of saying this is part of knowledge creation. And what makes this interesting is also the engagement of this expression. Combination, which is really trying to see a multiple or a plethora of techniques and methods that encourage knowledge creation. And internalization is really making sure that this knowledge that has been created is also personalized to the person. And as it is personalized to the person then takes ownership and accountability to be able to work with this knowledge. And this then are the four stages of knowledge creation within the idea of organizational learning. So the process then of organizational learning is really trying to develop new knowledge. How do we do this? Socialization, articulation, combination, and internalization. So that's more or less the chapter where we must decide. I think the most critical part of the chapter is then this, to look at the range of methods and techniques that can be used to promote training and development. And I think this doesn't happen just like that. This pays attention to the needs that we spoke about. If we are able to know the needs that we are occupying and the needs that we're seeking or trying to fill out, we are then able to choose a range of methods to be able to train. And these range of methods can include things like coaching, mentoring, rotation on the job, learnerships, degree programs, ABET, adult basic education, private training, case studies, role play, in-basket training, and these are more managerial based types of interventions. Importantly, what needs to be done is for us to be able to integrate some of these ideas practically into meeting and assisting the challenges that are available on the ground and seeking for ways in which we can become better through meeting these challenges. I don't know if we have any questions, and we call it a day with chapter 13, which is the chapter on training, development, and learning. I don't know if anybody has got questions to ask about the chapter that we've just covered. Remember, I did say that the next task for you is not only reading the chapter, but also making sure that you also go and read the textbook so that you also understand the complete text. Okay, any comments? Okay, no comments or questions. So tomorrow, I think tomorrow we are back to our normal slot, 4 o'clock. I'll send out the invite. We then cover the last chapter in the series, which is how do we deal with industrial conflict, and we'll look at the work of the CCMA. So by tomorrow, you are then able to answer the questions of the case study. You are then able to answer the questions even of the test when it becomes available. So this is a great stride. Please remember to work on your assignment. Please also remember to familiarize yourself with the range of assessments that we have put. And then tomorrow we'll talk about the last chapter, which is chapter 14. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow.